You can
Good
continue.
afternoon. Good afternoon, colleagues. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to this humanitarian talk on disaster risk reduction in the context of fragility. My name is Jenty Kirschwood, and I am the chair and the moderator of this session today, but I'm also the head of global risk analysis and reporting at the UNDRR. And so today's topic, which really focuses on how disaster risk reduction can be a component of anticipatory humanitarian action, is of course very key to our mandate, and we're extremely interested to see how this can be better operationalized and to learn from the experts today about how this can be a useful tool in the context of climate change and fragility. It's clear that in order to reduce humanitarian needs and shift from response to preparedness, an approach to building concerted efforts across all actors working in the humanitarian development peace nexus is required. And it's also clear that disaster risk reduction is increasingly important in the context of fragility, where compound risk factors such as ecosystem degradation, climate change, conflict and epidemics, forced migration, and unregulated urbanization affect people's resilience to natural disasters and intensify climate change impacts. And it's clear that those also have systemic and cascading impact on factors such as poverty, food insecurity, displacement. And so in order to manage risk holistically, it's essential that we get both ahead of the curve and more holistic in our understanding. So today we have a group of experts with us who can really look around three key guiding questions. How might fragility and risk analysis be used to inform specific strategies on climate mitigation and adaptation, DRR and resilience building, and including on forced displacement? How can early warning systems contribute to risk mitigation and anticipatory action? And what are the best approaches in cooperation with local governance structures in civil protection and public awareness raising? So I hope that today's panel, which includes Dan Schreiber of the OECD, Jan Danihelka from the Czech Hydrometeorological Institute, Pavel Danihelka, a researcher in the public-private civil-military space for many years, and Lucas Laube from People in Need in Cambodia, can enrich our thinking on some of these areas. And if you permit me, I'd like to hand over to the panelists in that order, just to make a brief introduction before we leap into the reflections on the questions raised. Dan, the floor is yours, followed by Jan.
Thank you so much for this introduction, and I'm very pleased to be part of this panel today for this fascinating discussion. So I am currently indeed in the crisis and fragility team of the OECD, supporting among other the International Network on Conflict and Fragility. And I have a background also in humanitarian affairs, among other. I must say that I think this discussion is particularly important for a number of reasons. If we look at the current situation, about half of the 48 country contexts most affected by the effects of climate change are also on the OECD list of fragile and conflict-affected situations. In conflict-affected fragile contexts, 6 of the 10 largest peace operations were in countries most exposed to climate change. And we are seeing that spontaneous as well as slow onset disasters threaten human security, build infrastructure and livelihoods, disrupt social activity and economic cycles, and may require significant economic resources for recovery and adaptation. And at the same time, we are seeing that the most recent data we have on official development assistance allows to say that only 2.5% of ODA went to supporting disaster risk reduction in fragile and conflict-affected states in the last available year to us in terms of the final ODA figures, which is 2019. So all of that is to say that there is clearly a need to better connect discussions we have about fragility, about disaster risk reduction and the mitigation of the effects of climate change, and the aspects of the humanitarian development and peace nexus. So what do we need to do? First, we need to be conscious of the fact that even the most fragile and conflict-affected settings do require prevention and preparedness to be front and center. And this is also something that is clearly part of the DAC Nexus recommendation. Second, and conversely, we need to understand that the multidimensional fragility and governance challenges in fragile and conflict-affected situations are key to the success of DRR, among other efforts. And there is a need to promote ecologically aware and informed approaches to activities across the humanitarian development and peace nexus. Climate change can act as a risk multiplier in fragile contexts, closely linked to human, economic, social, political, and security dimensions of fragility. And we've seen with COVID-19 and now with the Ukraine crisis how global shocks can have knock-on effects, including at a transborder level. And this requires also to be taken into account. So understanding multidimensional fragility and governance challenges is of key importance when planning the response. And at the same time, we need to ensure and promote ecologically aware and informed approaches to activities across the nexus. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Dan, for those reflections. I think you've really hit on some of the core areas about climate change as a risk multiplier, but also that need to have a multidimensional understanding of fragility and beginning to recognize, if you like, the people-planet prosperity intersection, and that increasingly on our small planet, how interdependent those three questions are. Perhaps I can now call on Pavel Danhelka to provide some reflections also on those core questions. The floor is yours. I believe that we may have a microphone issue.
Yes, you are, of course, right. It's better now?
Perfect. Please go ahead.
So then my background is research and science. So I'm looking to this problem from this point as well as from the point of the humanity. Yeah, and our three questions are strongly interconnected. So I will start with the fragility and the risk analysis or risk evaluation, which is there. And probably we have a lot of efforts to be done to be better in this moment. If we will look to recent problems like problem with COVID, problem with Ukraine crisis, and as underlying problem is problem of climate change. So we will see that the phenomenon which is nicknamed or called gray rhino is visible there. We underestimate a lot of problems, and we believe that the risk will not materialize. So then probably we will need a better understanding of the fragility in holistic background. And to see how strong are feedbacks which are there, and how much can influence overall situation there. Yeah, and this is also important, is to link to early warning system. Actually, it's like it's a very old proverb from the medicine saying that when the illness is curable, no, too many people can distinguish it and see it. And if it is clear that the illness is there for everybody, usually it's too late. And we are in a very similar situation. Yeah, so we have to listen and to observe weak signals for the risk analysis and for understanding of fragility of our society. And this fragility is based on mutual interconnection of many things and many phenomena in society. Yeah, and so then the early warning is especially important not only for fast onset events like hurricanes or earthquakes, but also for slow onset events, which is typical for the climate change, which is soil degradation, which is the drought, for example, and other things. And especially here, we need the valuable early warning system interconnected with fragility and risk analysis. Yeah? So we have to be able to predict what will happen in not immediately, but in some medium future. So this is a very important thing, and especially for forced displacement. People don't want generally to be displaced. I can see it here in our country when many people are coming from Ukraine. They want to be at home. So let's do some anti-fragility action to allow it. And to prevent forced displacement and displacement generally. And what is very important for best practices or in cooperation with local governance structures. Actually, any disaster is starting at the local level. You know, so, and the most significant force of the society is usually also at the local level, at the activity of the people. But we need to interconnect two general structure. There is pyramidally structured crisis management of the state, of the government, of international one. In, for example, a European one. So which is and which must be organized in a pyramidal structure with clear competencies and so on. But together with it, we need also to work with volunteer action, with local activities, with municipalities, with society. There is a really strong very big strength which is there, and we see it. We have seen it during COVID epidemic here. We see it today in crisis of Ukraine. Yeah? But that too systems should learn to cooperate very well, which means we have a problem we have two problems generally. One is something what I can call Babel Tower, that we are in these systems not talking the same language. We need to understand to each other. It's a question of good communication, which is there. And second problem is that sometimes we can see something like resortism. It is mine, it's your resort, it is another resort. There is no resort, there is society. And all that resorts should be again interconnected. And this is again based on the well-prepared and active communication. So this is my short vision on that problem. And thank you very, very much for the possibility to speak here.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for those fascinating reflections on this underlying problem that we are fundamentally underestimating risk and that we need a better holistic understanding of risk. But we also need to move, if I may speak in UNDRR terms here, to an all of society approach to understanding risk that needs to mobilize communities, needs to mobilize local action, but also needs to create more of a common language across stakeholders to improve communication. And that also some of these issues about linking early warning systems, anticipatory action, need to be better understood so that we can create positive feedback loops in the space of for much of this action, as opposed to right now the rather fractured approaches that aren't meeting the systemic risk needs. Thank you so much for those insights. And if I may now, I'd like to turn to Jan Danhelka, who I believe can provide us some good reflections on these questions, particularly honing in on the areas of his research and some of his work looking at this from the meteorological and risk management side. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon to everyone. It's difficult to follow those two speakers who try to pack it all together. And I would like to start to say, just after the university, I started to work as a hydrological forecaster. And I really thought that what really matters is to do technically the best forecast you can. So it was my aim, and I thought really that would be the solution: provide the best estimate of the flood that you can provide. But soon I realized that it's only one piece of the overall system that is really needed to work as a whole, to help us saving lives, saving property, and making or eliminating, mitigating the risk we face. Well, the floods and droughts and those hydrometeorological phenomena are most frequent naturalists that we face globally. And what I learned from working for WMO was that exactly the more you travel, more you speak with the people from different countries, the more you learn about the fragility as an important factor in the performance of all the humanitarian and DR activities that you do at the time. For example, we spoke about COVID-19 situation. And there was a very short review of how national hydrological services were impacted. And if you look to Europe, Czech Republic included, there was actually no impact on delivery of services and products. The data flow, we delivered everything at the same amount, same key performance indicators as a year before. But if you look at the global picture, you now realize that we have a lot of spots where we lost the data that we will never recover. We will never learn what was the flow, what was the water stage, and what was the meteorological observation, just because of impact of COVID. But that will impact us in the future. Anyway, what in the case of hydrometeorological hazard is the way forward to really help protect people and enhance our ability in disaster risk reduction is early warning system. It was mentioned already, but early warning system is quite often not understood same all around the world. And as I said, my initial understanding was, this is the production of the forecast, which is not. There are four components recognized: the risk knowledge, the forecasting and monitoring as the second one, the dissemination of forecast, and maybe the most importantly, a capacity to respond to the information passed through the early warning system. personally, I think there's also fifth component, and it's a network or connection or framework which holds all this together, because risk knowledge affects all the other parts of the early warning system. For example, if you look at the experience of tornado in the Czech Republic last year, we simply didn't expect that tornado of F4 strength might appear in the Czech Republic and travel for more than 40 minutes throughout the country and causing such a problem that was never recorded before. And therefore, our early warning system was built a little bit differently than the one which is in operation in United States in Tornado Alley, where they know that tornado poses the greatest hazard and greatest risk to inhabitants. So they really have a different ways how to forecast and warn in the times of tornado. So this is something that needs to be still enhanced, and often which is important. What is important from my point of view is the holistic approach. Sometimes we call it end-to-end warning system, early warning system, but it depends which end you start. And from my perspective, more and more, I think that we should always start at the end of users of the early warning system and build it from there to the other parts to really fit the early warning system to the best benefits of the users. So as I said, everything from my point of view starts with a risk knowledge, but those components of early warning system, if not tested together as a one system, may clearly fail in the most critical part. But anyway, this is the way forward. And what is important, the fifth element or fifth component, the connection and framework of the early warning system, again, is closely connected to the fragility of the society and the governance of skills and governance processes of the society, because that is something which really needs close coordination, which often lacks in the fragile situation and fragile setup. So the important thing in that aspect also is that everyone, from my perspective, involved in the early warning system, which is which that includes the forecasters, that include also the risk specialists, disaster risk community, but also municipalities or fire rescue offices, civil protection, others are responsible for the whole process. This is often are not the case or not very well understood, including Czech Republic. We see that sometimes, this is your part of the job in the early warning system, and then we do something, and then there's someone else responsible for something else. But it seems it doesn't work like that. Unless you feel the responsibility for the overall process and for overall impact and output of the early warning system, that wouldn't work. And I don't know if this is the way forward, how to enhance our understanding of early warning system as a functional tool. What are the factors that make it successful, and how to build it into fragile communities where, of course, the impacts of disaster, as was already introduced, compound. There's a lot of cascading effects in the system, including and especially affecting critical infrastructure. All that then maybe have a solution only if we are organized well, build anti-fragile systems with layers, with a lot of decentralization, and with simple rules that would enable us to run it under the stress. Thank you for invitation for today.
How early warning systems. Please excuse me, I think we had a slight connectivity issue, but yeah, and I very much agree with your key points about really needing to make sure that hydromet data is not only about the quality of the forecast, of course that's important, but about the other aspects of being able to disseminate and having the capacity to respond. But also I liked very much your perspective on that point of needing the network. And I hope that today's event is a good opportunity to think about who needs to be part of that network and different parts of the solution. If you permit me now, I'd like to turn over to our fourth speaker of the day, Lucas Laub, who I believe will both share a short video on that can outline some reflections on these issues, as well as speak a little bit to the key questions of today's session. Lucas, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good evening from Phnom Penh. I mean, it's quite difficult now to have some speech after my procedures basically said everything. Interestingly, the issue here is climate change, and you know, I'm sitting in Phnom Penh. There is dry season, but we are facing flooding at the moment. So the planet has been changing, and we can see it, and it's everyday problem in Cambodia. Just to illustrate it, Cambodia lost last year 1% of GDP just because of the flooding, and to your imagination, it's basically $250 million annually. If this will continue, the GDP loss will be even 10% in 2050. So that will be incredible, huge losses for Cambodia, just from economic perspective, but also there will be losses from human perspective. I will talk more about Cambodia because I'm based in Cambodia. I'm country director, and we developed so-called system, which is called EBS 1294, which became a national system of early warning system for Cambodia. And I will basically talk more about how to make early warning system successful and what are opportunities and what are challenges. Basically, when we created the system, and it took us 9 years to create it, which is long time. So you need money, and you need patience of your donors, and you need patience of government to build up a system. You need that your system are simple, that people understand them. You need that systems are accurate. It cannot happen to you that your target, the people, the beneficiaries, will receive messages basically one day after the flooding is over. So your system has to be accurate, and they have to work with proper data. Then what is also important is to be able to scale up the systems, because usually we as NGO, we start with 2 provinces, and then we go ahead and we cover all country. But for that, you need technology which is cheap, which you can find on the local market and which is repairable. There are many early warning systems which actually are dependent on materials which you cannot find in the country, and then basically those systems collapse and then basically the system collapses. Then the fourth point, and that's probably one of the most important, is the system has to be accessible for people. So there should be for free. Either you can do it via phone, via SMS, or via voices, or you can use social media. That's what we are now experimenting in Cambodia, that we are using Facebook. You can, with phone companies, there is a big role of private sectors. That's same what we are doing now in Cambodia, that Smart, which is a big company, something like Czech Vodafone company, would be partner of our system, and they will distribute the SMS through us. And all of this, because the systems are very demandful, they have to be multi-stakeholders. So you have to actually have a lot of provincial government and local government and other bodies in the system, which then are connected, and which everybody knows its particular role in the system. Otherwise, your system would not work out. So that's probably the key thing about how to create good early warning systems in countries like Cambodia. Then there was another question regarding anticipatory action protocol, which are great protocols. They are basically usually thematic one, and they focus either on flooding or for droughts. sometimes for both of them, and they should basically illustrate what particular state or governmental bodies are doing in case of disaster. The issue with them is a little bit like legal framework of particular state bodies. We face, for instance, in Cambodia, that Minister of Agriculture is basically the right minister, but there you have also Ministry of Rural Development, and there is big overlap between those two ministries who should be in charge of drought. The same situation is with floods, where we have Ministry of Water and we have NCDM, which is something like National Committee for Disaster Management. But again, the legal framework between those ministries is not clear and needs to be cleared up. However, of course, there are also other agendas of those ministries, and it's a question to which extent disaster management is priority for them or not. So anticipatory action protocols are great tools, but they have to be really clarified. There has to be ownership of one body which would be in charge of them. And then there has to be trainings, plenty of trainings and coordination trainings among particular governmental bodies. The same goes to EDS. As I said, and they have to be actually multi-stakeholder. You have to have, because of legal aspect, you have to have more ministries, more provincial and community involvement, and there has to be clear role for each of them. Otherwise, your systems would not work. So thank you for the ability to talk here, and I'm looking forward for discussion.
Thank you so much, Lucas, for those reflections. I think they really draw on clearly what is a wealth of very relevant practical experience of trying to put words into action. And I think that some of the points that you raise about the fact that the impacts of climate change are not theoretical, they're here, and we need to be actively adjusting and adapting now are very well noted, but also of the need for very practical and accessible solutions that really are able to reach that final mile, I think are very, very well noted. I can see that I would really like to encourage those online to put questions into the Slido. I think that there are very many angles that have come out in this rich discussion. And if participants would like to send questions, they can certainly do so through slido.com. I believe that you already have the code, but let me just remind you, it's #EHF-HT4. So for those of you who may have a question you'd like to put in the Slido, please do so using that code, #EHF-HT4. You can also see it on the slide banner at the bottom of this screen. Just drawing on this discussion, I understand that there may be a short video that we were going to show. Hannah, I don't know if you would like to bring that to the fore now, but perhaps perhaps we can return to that and perhaps just dig a little bit more into some of the core questions. I think that, Dan, you were really looking at those issues about the larger global systems and what needs to happen to make global systems more responsive to that type of risk multiplier, multi-risk environment, and how early warning systems might really be able to evolve to respond better in fragility settings. I wonder if that's something you might be able to reflect a little bit on. And perhaps also, Jan, if you could, reflect a little bit more on what this means for the actual design of systems and cooperation going forward. And perhaps if we can hear a little bit from those two perspectives, and then we can take the next round from the floor and from the Slido. Over to you. Perhaps Dan, followed by Jan, and then we will come back to Pavel and Lucas.
Thank you so much. I think, I mean, we're clearly dealing with a multidimensional issue here, and we've already, I think, I mean, the different speakers have pointed to the interconnectedness of systems in terms of people involved, in terms of challenges we are facing, and in terms of the processes that are going on. So, I mean, reflecting not just on what we're dealing with in the context of the OECD, but also my past experience in humanitarian affairs, what has struck me is that when it comes to prevention and preparedness, humanitarians in many protracted crises do have an important role in addressing natural disasters, in overcoming ongoing challenges. I'm thinking, for example, of the Congo as a context where I've worked, and where, for example, in the year 2015, we saw in the context of La Nina and El Nino, a major issue of both droughts and floodings, depending on where in the country you were situated. And we saw in this regard that humanitarians had had most of the early response capacities in the country, but were not organized to address this type of issues. And at the same time, investing in local capacities in this regard is not the first priority of the international humanitarian system. So there are some disconnects in terms of the way the systems function indeed, as has been highlighted by some of my fellow panelists, that needs to be addressed, and a lack of communication with regards to available information to make sure that the right systems can work together. But we're also seeing, I mean, a really important role for local capacities, and in particular, local governments and customary authorities in many contexts. And in this regard, I mean, if you look, for example, at the context of the Sahel, which is greatly impacted by climate change and by issues around resilience, what we are seeing is that often, I mean, first of all, many of the issues materialize strongly at the local level, whether it's about land tenure, whether it's about urbanization, as some of the key challenges that need to be addressed, and yet the local authorities often lack investments, lack capacities to prevent and react to the challenges they face. In fact, when you look at African countries where data is available, expenditures by subnational governments represent only 16% of general government expenditure and 4% of GDP, which is lower than all over the world regions. And we're also seeing that ODA often does not necessarily focus on those local capacities. What it also means is that often data is produced but not necessarily used. And I think this was also an important point that was mentioned by Jan earlier. It's not just about, I mean, having better data, having a better systems to capture the information, but also how do you transform it into action and into timely preventive action and preparedness. In this regard, again, linkages with existing national structures, including at subnational level, are key.
Thank you. Thank you so much for those reflections, Dan. I think you give us some real food for thought. And if I may, if I could ask Jan now just to come in on that question of how do we improve the quality of forecasting, particularly in those more fragile settings, and get those networks beginning to be established in places perhaps where the competition for government attention is particularly pressing, and where there may be a tendency for this to to fall down the priority list. And before I hand to you, I would also like to say we've got a question in from the Slido, and perhaps Pavel, when Jan has made his remarks, you can reflect a little bit on what the community can bring to bring more climate risk approach to humanitarian aid. But Jan, over to you.
Okay, thank you. I wish I knew the solution for what you ask, how to really overcome all those problems. I don't know really the perfect solution. I think it's a long run. Anyway, I have to agree what Dan explained. There's a really mismatch between what we are able to deliver at global or regional scale. A lot of forecasting systems are being already operational or under development. That includes global meteorological, but also flood forecasting system, drought monitoring and forecasting system. We know a lot about El Nino and La Nina effects and impacts worldwide. What we all already have tsunami warning at the ocean basin level. So this is something that could be technically done. The problem starts how to really use it in the field, because all risk is local, and to act accordingly to risk knowledge and accordingly to received information on imminent hazard or imminent danger. There's always the context is always important, the local context and knowledge. Now, just giving an example, if you look at what happened in Germany last year with the floods. Now, there was a warning, extreme bad weather warning, but to translate it into the information in the field that someone are living there for 50 years should, based on this information, just take the basic stuff, elementary stuff, and run away from the river. It's a long journey from that information to really evacuation, because you always interpret the information in the context you have. So you look what was the extreme you experienced in your life, and you act accordingly. So maybe based on this information, it's the most obvious thing to go to pump water from your underground of your house, because this is what was the worst happened to you so far. So I really think that strengthening the local capacities and local interpretation and contextualization of the information from the global systems or regional system, which of course can be built with the effort, but and cannot be operated by each country, especially the fragile one. So maybe using really wisely the finance, limited finance that we have to combine what global community offers and where the local work and local expertise is needed might be the way forward. But really, I don't have a simple recipe for that.
Yeah, no, thank you. I think you beautifully highlight that one of the key challenges, particularly in the climate future, which is essentially that the goalposts have moved, and that wealth of local knowledge, that wealth of community experience is still valid, and there are still many local solutions that communities know and operate to reduce risk, but they may be less effective in the context of an unpredictable and volatile climate future, and that requires a new type of risk discourse. So, Pavel, if I can come back to that question from the chat on, is the Nexus approach the solution? What can the DRR community bring to help build a more climate risk approach to climate risk informed approach to humanitarian aid? I'd love to hear your reflections on that, and then we'll move quickly to the film. Over to you.
Thank you for the pardon. Thank you for the question. It is a nice question, and but I think that this is something what the community of disaster reduction is already thinking about. And as an example, I will remind the last year European Forum for Disaster Risk Reduction, which was held in Portugal. And then one from the priorities actions was understanding and communicating existing, emerging and future systemic risks. This is important that climate change is systemic risks. It is sometimes is misunderstood as single risks which are separated. It's not true. There is a systemic risk of climate and environment and society. Yeah? And then some points of that priority was also to build on international cooperation a new inclusive and accessible system to address such a systemic risk. So to share knowledge and tools which are. Also, this is important to improve the coherence with the leverage global agendas to address climate change and disaster risk and humanitarian actions, and also related socio-economic challenges at all levels. Because that humanitarian actions are consequences of some socio-economic impacts and challenges. And also there is not a separated part of climate change problem. So there is a global one. So then we need to invest to some accessible and inclusive approaches and tools, which are based on data, on hard data, to identify, to understand that risks. Especially that climate related, because we have still some gaps on understanding of such risks. And another of priorities which can help to international disaster reduction is the creation of inclusive, or not creation, it's further development of inclusive and collaborative system for the governments, for risk governments, and for targeting decision making. Yeah, so then again, there is the collaboration at international or transboundary system, and common capacity building and sharing of knowledge and good practices which can help us, as well as mutual humanitarian assistance.
Thank you so much. And I think this question is generating quite a lot of rich thought. I know that Lucas, you were also hoping to reflect a little bit on this, as well as Dan. So please, I know we're running out of time, but your quick interventions, because I think that, as Pavel outlined, I think this has really gotten to the crux of one of these issues. Is the nexus really the solution? Lucas, your thoughts?
Thank you. Yeah, according to me, Nexus is solution. It's already here, and it's great that there is Nexus. Maybe interestingly, what COVID learned us that not only, for instance, Ministry of Agriculture and Ministry of Water, it should be part of EVS systems and of all protocols, but also Ministry of Social Affairs, because you can connect actually EVS system with social protection systems, and then you can create like shock protection systems. Basically, it means that if flood is coming, people who are so-called ID poor, who are under social systems, they should receive more money to be able to evacuate it. There is system, it's to some extent working, it's more about the roles, but of course there are obstacles. One of the obstacles is transborderity. Basically, governments, they don't like to share data among each other, and sometimes it's a little bit tricky to get relevant data from a different state. And basically, floods and droughts, they don't know the borders. So that's one of the issues. The other one issue is basically, and we have to be clear here, the money which goes into the system. There are not big money for DR system or the whole DR component. Sometimes I'm wondering if maybe what would help if, for instance, our system, if there is some study from our system which would actually calculate how much asset was saved only when you had a system. As far as I don't know any study like that. I just know predictions, but no particular study. So maybe that would help, that would advocate. Thank you.
Perfect. Dan, will you come in very briefly, and then we'll just quickly take a look at the video. And then if you allow, I would like to ask after the video, each of the speakers just to come up with one key point they really want to make sure that we remember for today's session in those very last final minutes, just 30 seconds, a key take home. So I give you the time of the video to mull over that. If the colleague could please put the short film up, I think it will help give a real local experience to what we've been hearing.
ទឹកជំនន់គឺតែងតែកើតឡើងជារៀងរាល់ឆ្នាំនៅរដូវវស្សាក្នុងប្រទេសកម្ពុជាហើយវាបណ្ដាលឲ្យដំណាំកសិកម្មសត្វគោក្របីលំនៅឋាននានារបស់ប្រជាពលរដ្ឋត្រូវបានបំផ្លិចបំផ្លាញនិងមានប្រជាពលរដ្ឋមួយចំនួនធំបានទទួលរងនឹងការប៉ះពាល់ពីទឹកជំនន់នេះ ប្រជាជនកម្ពុជាស្ទើរទាំងអស់ជួបប្រទះនឹងអាកាសធាតុដ៏ធ្ងន់ធ្ងរនេះយ៉ាងហោចណាស់ម្ដងក្នុងមួយឆ្នាំប៉ុន្តែមានប្រជាជនជាច្រើនពុំបានត្រៀមខ្លួនគ្រប់គ្រាន់សម្រាប់មហន្តរាយនោះទេយើងអាចផ្លាស់ប្ដូរហេតុការណ៍ដ៏អាក្រក់នេះបាន រៀបចំនិងបង្កើតដោយអង្គការ People in Need ប្រព័ន្ធប្រកាសឲ្យដឹងមុន 1294 គឺជាប្រព័ន្ធមួយដែលផ្ដល់នូវសារជូនដំណឹងជាសំឡេងឲ្យមានការប្រុងប្រយ័ត្នទុកជាមុនទៅកាន់ទូរស័ព្ទដៃរបស់ប្រជាពលរដ្ឋដែលកំពុងរស់នៅក្នុងស្ថានភាពគ្រោះថ្នាក់បំផុតមុនដំបូងប្រព័ន្ធនេះត្រូវបានរៀបចំដាក់ឲ្យដំណើរការឡើងនៅក្នុងឆ្នាំ 2013 ហើយក៏បានផ្ដល់ជូនសារប្រកាសអាសន្នអំពីទឹកជំនន់ទៅកាន់មនុស្សរាប់ពាន់នាក់ រដំណើរការចុះឈ្មោះចូលទៅកាន់ការប្រើប្រាស់ប្រព័ន្ធគឺមិនត្រូវបានបង់ថ្លៃឡើយលោកអ្នកអាចចុះឈ្មោះបានដោយគ្រាន់តែទូរស័ព្ទទៅកាន់លេខ 1294 ហើយស្ដាប់ការណែនាំដើម្បីជ្រើសរើសទីតាំងខេត្តស្រុកនិងឃុំរបស់លោកអ្នករស់នៅដើម្បីឲ្យប្រព័ន្ធប្រកាសឲ្យដឹងមុនមានប្រសិទ្ធភាពអាចជឿទុកចិត្តនិងព័ត៌មានទាន់ហេតុការណ៍ពីរយៈកម្ពស់ទឹកគឺជាកត្តាសំខាន់ ដូចនេះហើយអង្គការ People in Need បានបង្កើតឧបករណ៍វាស់កម្ពស់ទឹកដើម្បីធ្វើឲ្យវិធីសាស្ត្រក្នុងការព្យាករណ៍ទឹកជំនន់មានភាពប្រសើរឡើងជាងមុនដោយមានការបំពាក់ស៊ីមកាតដាក់នៅក្នុងឧបករណ៍នេះហើយវាដំណើរការដោយប្រព័ន្ធសូឡាដើម្បីវាស់កម្ពស់ទឹកដែលកើតឡើងខ្ពស់បំផុតនៅឯទីតាំងដែលបានដំឡើង ទិន្នន័យប្រកាសអាសន្នអំពីទឹកជំនន់នឹងផ្ញើទៅកាន់ការគ្រប់គ្រងក្នុងប្រព័ន្ធអ៊ីនធឺណិតរបស់ប្រតិបត្តិការបណ្ដាញទូរស័ព្ទចល័តដែលមានសេវាគ្រប់ដណ្ដប់ទូទាំងប្រទេសកម្ពុជាហើយរាល់ទិន្នន័យទាំងអស់នឹងផ្ញើទៅកាន់ប្រព័ន្ធការគ្រប់គ្រងទិន្នន័យលើអ៊ីនធឺណិតរបស់គណៈកម្មាធិការគ្រប់គ្រងគ្រោះមហន្តរាយថ្នាក់ខេត្ត កំឡុងពេលដែលមានភ្លៀងធ្លាក់ខ្លាំងជោគជាំរយៈកម្ពស់ទឹកអាចនឹងកើនឡើងដល់កម្រិតប្រកាសអាសន្ន នៅពេលដែលមានទឹកជំនន់កើតឡើងប្រព័ន្ធគ្រប់គ្រងកុំព្យូទ័ររបស់គណៈកម្មាធិការគ្រប់គ្រងគ្រោះមហន្តរាយថ្នាក់ខេត្តនឹងផ្ញើសារទៅកាន់លេខទូរស័ព្ទរបស់សមាជិកម្នាក់ក្នុងគណៈកម្មាធិការគ្រប់គ្រងគ្រោះមហន្តរាយថ្នាក់ខេត្តដែលជាអ្នកតាមដានជាប្រចាំហើយសមាជិករបស់គណៈកម្មាធិការគ្រប់គ្រងគ្រោះមហន្តរាយថ្នាក់ខេត្តនឹងធ្វើការផ្ញើសារប្រកាសកម្រិតគ្រោះថ្នាក់ដែលជាព័ត៌មានទាន់ហេតុការណ៍និងជាពេលវេលាមួយសម្រាប់ធ្វើការសម្រេចចិត្តគាត់ថតសារជាសំឡេងដើម្បីធ្វើការណែនាំដល់សហគមន៍ដែលទទួលរងការប៉ះពាល់ពីទឹកជំនន់ដើម្បីឲ្យពួកគាត់ធ្វើការជម្លៀសចេញពីលំនៅឋានទៅកាន់ទីទួលសុវត្ថិភាពដែលនៅជិតបំផុតសារជាសំឡេងនេះនឹងត្រូវបានផ្ញើជាបន្ទាន់ទៅកាន់គ្រួសារដែលបានចុះឈ្មោះប្រើប្រាស់នៅក្នុងប្រព័ន្ធនិងនៅក្នុងទីតាំងណាដែលបានទទួលការប៉ះពាល់ដោយទឹកជំនន់ប៉ុណ្ណោះ ការប្រកាសឲ្យដឹងមុនធ្វើឲ្យប្រជាពលរដ្ឋមានការត្រៀមរៀបចំទុកជាមុនសម្រាប់ខ្លួនគាត់ផ្ទាល់ក្រុមគ្រួសារនិងការប្រកបរបរចិញ្ចឹមជីវិតរបស់ពួកគាត់មុនពេលគ្រោះមហន្តរាយមកដល់ ប្រព័ន្ធប្រកាសឲ្យដឹងមុន 1294 កំពុងតែជួយសហគមន៍ជាច្រើនក្នុងការត្រៀមរៀបចំខ្លួនជាចាំបាច់មុនពេលគ្រោះមហន្តរាយមកដល់មិនត្រឹមតែកំពុងអនុវត្តកម្មវិធីនេះទេតែពួកយើងកំពុងតែមានផែនការលើការគ្របដណ្ដប់ទូទាំង 25 ខេត្តក្រុងក្នុងឆ្នាំ 2020 ប្រព័ន្ធប្រកាសឲ្យដឹងមុន1294មានគោលបំណងក្លាយជាប្រព័ន្ធប្រកាសអាសន្នរាល់មុខសញ្ញាគ្រោះធម្មជាតិទាំងអស់ទៅកាន់ប្រជាពលរដ្ឋប្រព័ន្ធប្រកាសឲ្យដឹងមុនដែលមានភាពងាយស្រួលនិងទុកចិត្តដល់ប្រជាជនកម្ពុជាមានន័យថាពួកគេអាចកាត់បន្ថយការព្រួយបារម្ភចំពោះការបាត់បង់ទ្រព្យសម្បត្តិដោយសារគ្រោះធម្មជាតិហើយអាចយកចិត្តទុកដាក់លើការដឹកនាំជីវិតដោយសម្បូរបែបនិងរីករាយ
So I think that film has really shown us so clearly that it is possible to build early warning systems. It is possible to invest. It is possible to leverage technology. But the question is, how do we create those networks and how do we create those systems? So we're into the last couple of minutes. So if I may, what I'd like to do is just very briefly hand over to each of the speakers for just one key thought. Dan, over to you. A key thought you'd like to take home from today.
Thank you so much. My key thought is that the DAC recommendation on the humanitarian development and peace nexus in this context provides a useful framework that I would invite everyone to take a look at. If you Google DAC recommendation on the humanitarian development peace nexus and you look up the OECD DAC website in this regard, you will find a key normative instrument that is an agreed framework designed by humanitarian development and peace actors to foster greater coherence and coordination of efforts. And that really also addresses some of the key points we've been discussing today, including the need for joint risk-informed analysis of structural drivers of crisis and capacity also to address shocks, the role of national capacities and local capacities. Excellent. And working together.
Thank you so much. Jan, over to you. Just one key point. I realize we're really in the last second. Go ahead.
Just very briefly, risk is always local. And if you want to build anything effective, you have to start at a local level, design and verify from there as a starting point.
Perfect. I think that's a great message to take into the afternoon. Pavel, from your side, one key message to take from today's session.
Even if the risk is always global, so the climate change is probably the biggest challenge for the humanity of this planet. And we can win and we can lose. It depends on us.
I think that is incredibly inspiring and also an incredible challenge. And you're right. The nexus, if we don't address climate change, is useless. And Lucas, I think your work was beautifully exemplified by the fantastic video. Please, what would be the message for listeners today to really think about from today's session?
Thank you. Basically, the message is early warning systems can work, they are successful, they just need money, and we need patience from donors.
Thank you. I think that we are right on time. It's exactly 3 o'clock, and it's really been my honor and my pleasure to hear the perspectives around the table today, and also to realize that there is, in fact, a general consensus from organizations like OECD right down to the local level. There is a recognition that we have to look more seriously at this issue of the nexus. We have to look at connecting across the climate, humanitarian, development divide, if you like, and that there are solutions. There are approaches that can be scaled up, but we need to invest in them, and we need to look and we need to learn, because doing more of the same is simply not enough. I think that I'd finally like to end by really thanking all of the speakers today. I think it's been incredibly inspiring, and also to thank the organizers and the colleagues from the Czech government and all of the organizers of today's session from ECHO in really bringing together these different perspectives on humanitarian talks and disaster risk reduction in the context of fragility. Very much hope that we can continue these discussions, and invite you to continue to tune in to the interesting sessions coming up in the rest of this exciting event. Thank you very much. All the best.
And thanks to you.
Real